So there's been a new game all the rage recently, goes by the name Dark and Darker, and it's real good. A bit janky, but really, really good. It's been eating up most of my free time over this past week and seems kind of to be a shining example of indie design done right. Every so often, we'll see a small studio come along that just so happens to strike the perfect mix of elements to create something that feels fresh and novel, even if it is just a slightly new combination of existing ideas, which Dark and Darker is. I think the best way I could describe it would be, imagine if you took the wonky combat and movement of Morrowind, the round-based loot and extract mechanics of Tarkov, and put all of that together in a super dark, dangerous, and heavily Dungeons and Dragons inspired world. That, in a nutshell, is Dark and Darker. Also, no coincidence that the abbreviation for Dark and Darker is D&D, wearing the influence on their sleeve, and it's for good reason. To me, this game delivers what I imagined in my head when someone first described Dungeons and Dragons. Not in the literal sense, like not the actual tabletop game and rolling the dice and telling a story. No, it's not that, but more so the picture that painted of an adventure through a dark dungeon that's full of surprises, traps, deadly creatures, and other players, all in the search of loot. Dark and Darker really delivers that dungeon diving fantasy. They do a great job of it. So it all starts with the process of selecting a character. Currently, there are 6 in the game. They are the Fighter, Barbarian, Rogue, Ranger, Wizard, and Cleric. Like D&D, each of these come with their own distinct strengths and weaknesses. So for example, the Fighter can equip most weapons and armor, he's got well-rounded attributes and can sprint, but he's very gear dependent, pretty weak early on, and he has no spells that he can cast. Or take the Ranger, who's quick with bows, is able to track enemy footsteps and lay traps. However, the Ranger can't equip most melee weapons and has low melee damage, meaning they can be in a bit of trouble if you get up close to them. And then there's the Wizard, can cast powerful spells and meditate to refresh those, but has very slow interaction speed, so that means things like opening doors, which is pretty vital, and has low health and low physical damage. And the remaining 3 classes have their similar strengths and weaknesses, although there is some balancing that needs to be done. We expect that to happen because after all, the game isn't even released yet. They're just doing early testing, which is pretty crazy for a game that has become so popular so very quickly. Now, since I've been playing mostly solo, I started out with the Rogue. I assume that was the best bet. They got stealth after all. But later on, I ended up spending a bunch more time with the Wizard and Ranger. And while I like all of them for different reasons, I felt like I've had the most success solo, sneaking, being stealthy, dealing with groups of other players, and dealing with the PvE on the Ranger and the Wizard. It hasn't been as successful for me, at least on the Rogue, but Rogues are very strong. In fact, I think solo Rogues right now are topping the kill leaderboards that they have in the game. So don't think Rogues are weak, they're not. I just personally have had way more success going in and solo extracting as a Ranger and or the Wizard. A lot more fun with the Wizard. They're a lot more technical. It's kind of crazy already. I can just see that there's going to be a very, very high skill cap for Wizard players because already we're seeing crazy outmaneuver plays with haste and invisibility, sneaking around, and then like fireballing and chain lightning in groups of entire groups of players. It's crazy stuff. Lots of interesting tech and maneuverability, even with what is a relatively simple and even janky, I would call it, combat system. In fact, I think the game's combat is going to be one of the things that pushes the most people away because so much else around the edges is very, very strong. But the combat, I mean, yeah, it literally reminds me of like playing Morrowind. It is that kind of combat system. Very simple, very basic and bare bones, but it's adequate. It gets the job done as far as I'm concerned. So after creating a character, your next step is to actually select your skills. Every single class has a handful of these, of which you can pick to have 2. So on my Ranger, for example, I've been using the Field Ration, which is a health recovery skill with 3 charges, and Quick Shot, which fires 3 arrows in quick succession. Both are really strong abilities, and I've enjoyed them for soloing, but I also have access to a multi-shot, a quick fire ability, and the True Shot skill, and all of them are viable in different scenarios depending on playstyle. And then after you pick your 2 active skills, you have your perks. These are basically passive buffs that will enhance your attacks, your abilities, and your various spells. Every class looks to have about 9 or 10 of these perks in total, and when you first make your very first character of a class, you will get to pick one of them, and then once you play the game and level up, you hit levels 5, 10, and 15, you can then unlock 3 more passive slots for a total of 4 slots. So on my ranger, I picked the perks that increase headshot damage, bow draw speed, attack power, and bow move speed, but sometimes I'll swap those for some of my other options. Like I've got the option to see recent player footsteps or lay traps faster. I can increase my hearing distance. Lots of really cool, interesting abilities. And it does seem that even within the confines of each class, where while each class has their very specific strengths and weaknesses and they fill certain roles, between selecting what 2 active skills you want and then the 9 to 10 total passives, depending on which 4 you select, there does seem to be a bit of variety to cater to different parts of the strengths of each of the classes, if that makes sense. It just seems like multiple builds are viable depending on what you're trying to do. If you're focusing on PvE, if you're focusing on being sneaky, if you're focusing on PvP or trying to take out groups versus single target, there does seem to be a bit of variety, and that isn't even accounting for some further customization that looks to be coming in the game in the form of a skill tree. It's just not in the current iteration as we currently sit on playtest number 3, but yes, further customization is clearly in the works. They already have the in-game UI for it. Okay, so you've picked your class, you've got your skills and your 1 perk to start out. Now it's time to actually begin dungeon diving. So you queue up for a match, you will quickly get put into a lobby where it matches you with the rest of the players to fill up 16 total per round, and then you are spawned in, and this is where the fun begins. Now, I would say that there are 2 main things that make Dark and Darker appealing. 1, everything can kill you, and 2, the game tells you absolutely nothing. They are very, very figure it out yourself, hands-off kind of approach with this game, and it's really what has made the experience of going through, failing, learning, and getting better, it's made that so much more enjoyable. So when you first spawn in to the start of a match, you will be in a small cell. This will be located on the edge of one of the game's 3 maps. There are 3 layouts essentially. Nothing is procedural here. Not only are the layouts of each of the maps static, but also the location of different chests and of the enemy spawns, the bosses, all of that. You can learn it basically. It is a map that with enough experience you will learn. There are just 3 of these on rotation. So the room you spawn in has a single point of exit, and this will be a door leading into the adjacent room, and that room will contain any number of things depending on where you spawned in. Many times there will be a few basic enemies from skeletons, spiders, skull bats, zombies, and maybe even a few traps like floor spikes or wall spikes or even fake chests. Keep an eye out for those. And the objective is simple: find a loot, survive, and extract. The problem is with that middle part. Survival is hard. Most players, in fact, die to their very first room that has enemies in it. I know I sure did. On my first playthrough, I stumbled into this open area. I saw some loot on the ground. I walk over, and then all of a sudden, a few zombies just rise up out of the ground. Some skeleton archers start firing at me, and then this big old wraith swoops in, and I was dead on my very first run in under 2 minutes. Welcome to Dark and Darker. That is basically the experience. You will die again and again and again. Traps will kill you, basic monsters will kill you, poison clouds and wasp will kill you, arrows from archers will kill you, the various elite enemies like wraiths, skeletal captains, and everything on floors 2 and 3, those will kill you. And then of course, there are other players. They are going to kill you as well. You'll get backstabbed by a rogue, shot in the face by a ranger from across the room, or maybe even through a hole in the door. A barbarian will smash down a wall and 2-shot you with their axe. Invisible wizards will mow you down with their machine gun arcane missiles, or maybe they'll do chain lightning, or maybe a fireball. Lots of ways wizards can kill you very quickly. You are going to die often. That is the name of the game. And the thrill of the whole thing, though, is navigating through that, hiding, sneaking around, collecting your loot, and even doing some killing yourself. And to do so, that basically requires paying close attention. That means paying attention to the environment, seeing if there are any doors open, any torches that are out, which normally shouldn't be, which means a player has doused it essentially, but mostly by listening. This is definitely one of those games, like a lot of the extraction looter games, that puts an extreme emphasis on audio cues. You're gonna want headphones. You're gonna want this cranked up as loud as possible. If you don't have headphones, honestly, if you're playing with the sound off, you're just putting yourself at a severe disadvantage. Obviously, there is the sound of player footsteps. That is going to be a dead giveaway, but the sound of opening and closing doors, the sound of monsters chasing something, you'll learn what that sounds like, which means there is a player, something that the monsters are chasing. The sounds of torches going in and out, the sounds of players queuing up their different attacks or raising their shield, walking and running. Everything makes a sound. Those sounds are unique and distinct, and when you play the game enough, you will learn them, and that will give you a ton of information. It's basically like having 3D vision, more or less. That's how these games are designed, and Dark and Darker follows in the footsteps, basically, of a lot of the other Tarkov-likes in that sense. Play, listen, and learn. In doing so, you're just going to get infinitely better at survival, and that is actually what I found to be one of the strong suits of solo. I've seen a lot of complaining in the community already, asking for solo queue. I don't even know how necessary that is. I feel generally at an advantage, and I've gotten a lot of extractions because as a solo player, I can listen. And teams of 3, it's impossible. Okay, you could do it, but for the most part, in my experience, it is impossible for a team of 3 to remain wholly silent. And you hear a team of 3, you know it's a team of 3 because you can hear 3 sets of footsteps, multiple different attacks. It's pretty obvious. And then it's totally up to you what you do. If you feel confident, if you're well geared, if you feel capable of taking on multiple players, you can engage. You can scope it out to see if they're engaged in another fight with another team, or if they're engaged in a PvE fight in which you could third party and pick them off, or you could just turn around and run away. All of these are viable options, and all of these, in my opinion, are one of the primary perks to playing solo. Is you have an advantage if you're able to be patient. Obviously, the disadvantage though is if a team of 3 finds you and corners you, for the most part you're dead, unless you're a wizard who can haste, invis, and run away, or one of the faster classes like a rogue or ranger who's capable of closing doors quickly, laying traps, going invisible, whatever. But even then, if team of 3 gets on top of you, for the most part, unless you're a wizard, you're probably going to die. Or you can just outplay them and take them out, which is certainly a possibility. I will say, for all of the ragging I've done on the combat, and I know I haven't been very descriptive, it's just a very basic, every single weapon type in the game will have a variety of sort of combo attacks where basically you have 1, 2, or 3 swings. And as you chain these will attack in different directions and different types, be it stabbing or slashing or smashing or whatever, at different angles. And then once you learn the attack pattern of the weapon type that you are using, that's it. Like, that is the extent of the combat system. Now, the skill essentially comes how you manage your timing of things, when to engage, and moving in and out of range of stuff. You can outplay other people basically by outranging or outmaneuvering their abilities, but in terms of the action of just left clicking, it's pretty basic, it's pretty straightforward. It's really mostly about positioning and timing and trying to do that better than your opponent to land hits and dodge theirs. That's more or less. There is skill there, but it is a very rudimentary combat system, very simplistic. It's not, don't think like Chivalry or Mordhau levels of complexity, even though it looks on the surface possibly like that because it's like a simple attack things. The complexity in that sense just isn't there, but that does not mean just because a system is simple and or clunky does not mean there's not room for skill, and does not mean there's not room for outplaying people, because there certainly is. You can absolutely outplay people even with this fairly clunky, simple combat. And that's probably the only thing that I would say is a major criticism of the game, is the simplicity of it. But it could also be one of the strengths, if you think about it. That is something that could appeal to a larger audience. A very, very simple, basic, you swing the weapon, it attacks in a certain pattern. Are you close enough to hit or are you not? That's it. That's the system. So as I mentioned earlier, there are currently 3 maps in the game. I wouldn't be surprised if they add more eventually throughout the course of development, but right now there are 3. Each of them have a different layout and main rooms, but more or less the structure is the same. You're in a dungeon with a lot of small, tight corridors, interconnected hallways. There are a few larger rooms on every map. They're kind of more set piece areas, and then doors leading in and out of those with the occasional hidden passage or wall here and there. One thing I do really like about a few of these maps is there is a ton of verticality. There are even a few large rooms that have like 3 to 4 tiers of them, so quite a bit of height verticality that you can take advantage of, especially if you happen to be playing a wizard or a ranger. Being on the top level while there's a team below you, That's good fun, yeah. So as you're going throughout all along the way, beyond the dangers of enemy NPCs, traps, and other players, is the loot to collect. You will find loot on corpses, in chests, by breaking barrels, crates, and vases. There's loot on the floor, on bookshelves, on tables. There's loot everywhere. Some of it you can use, so there are weapons and armor to find. These will come in various rarities, from gray up to orange, I think is the highest tier that I've seen. This gear will come with different stats and bonuses, so the game's got your basic RPG stats like strength, agility, willpower, and then there's knowledge and resourcefulness, which that has to do with the speed in which you like interact with things, open doors. And then also some of the items will come with perks and additional bonuses, giving like a % boost to either offensive or defensive stats. And then there are consumables like potions, bandages, health kits, campfires, and throwables, as well as treasures. These are items that are of high value for trading. You can sell them to the game's vendors, basically to get a currency that lets you buy stuff that they sell. So you're in the dungeon, you're trying to survive, you're collecting loot, and then comes the battle royale mechanics. Every few minutes, a circle of what I assume are locust or some dungeon bug grows smaller, forcing you and everyone else on the map into an ever-shrinking area. Funny enough, with how dangerous and deadly pretty much everything else is in the game, the circle mechanic is an exception. It is on the lighter side compared to most battle royale games that I've played. Not that this is a battle royale, it just has that circle mechanic, which kind of just puts a sense of urgency into the dungeon diving and exploring. But yes, there is a circle mechanic. It will continue to close. It does so in stages, getting smaller and smaller each time until the final stage where it will engulf the floor entirely. How do you deal with this? Well, through the portals. In each match, after a certain amount of time, portals will start sprouting up that have two different variants. There is the escape and the descend portals. So opening an escape portal will teleport you safely with all of your loot back to the tavern, and the down portal basically takes you further into the dungeon. Although I don't want to spoil this particular part of the game for you, just because it was a really fun surprise on my first time through a down portal. Let me just say, I was not prepared for what awaited me below. But let's assume that as you're starting out, the first few times you actually make it and survive to an escape portal, that you'll actually just take it, which is exactly what I did. Well, in that case, congratulations, you survived, at least for now. So you're going to be taking all of the stuff that you have on your character with you, and then anything that you don't want to actually physically use for your next round, you can either sell off to one of the 12 merchants in the game. They sell an assortment of items that are on a rotating stock. Some of them will buy any gear or treasures that you don't want to keep, giving you gold in return that lets you buy whatever it is you do need. You will regularly be purchasing consumables for sure, things like health potions and bandages, as well as any gear for new characters, because yes, you're gonna die a lot. You might not even make it to an escape portal your first through playthroughs, in which case your inventory gets wiped, all of your gear that you collected and any items is gone, and you start with a basic fresh character. Any currency or extra gear that you find and take out by extracting, at that point, again, you can use it, or you can put it in a stash, which will then be accessed by your refreshed character whenever you do happen to die. And then you do this again and again and again, and that is the loop, what's often referred to as the Tarkov-like loot, survive, extract, repeat. That whole process is very enjoyable, I think largely because all of the dangers and the stakes are so high that there is a level of tension every round, and it feels very rewarding when you extract. Even if I just go in and I encounter only one player, even just going through that process and getting out with like half of an inventory of stuff and getting to extract, even that feels very rewarding because you feel accomplished simply by not dying, because yes, you will die very, very often. And then I will say something else that's really been enjoyable about this game is just trying out new classes or play styles and builds. Like I said, I've leveled up a rogue, ranger, and wizard, and I've enjoyed all of them. As you play, you kill, you extract, you're going to gain experience. This levels you up, and that unlocks those additional perk slots, at which point really starts to boost your capabilities and the different ways you can play. I do still want to try the other three classes solo as well, the barbarian, the fighter, and the cleric. Not exactly convinced that the cleric is going to be able to do much of anything. They definitely seem like a primarily support class. I don't know how successful they will be solo, but I want to try them out, because it's been going through the process of leveling up, trying the different skills and trying the different passive perks. It's been really fun to see what works and what doesn't, and seeing what you can go in and find success with or even just survive with. On top of that, like I mentioned earlier, there is still an entire progression system that's not even in the game. This looks like a skill tree of sorts, and that will be coming presumably in later updates, but they already have the UI for it. So clearly they've got plans for additional customization and additional tailoring of builds. So if I were to boil Dark and Darker down, I would say this. The pros of the game are it has fantastic immersion and sense of adventure. Like I said before, it really feels like a true D&D experience. It is such a great job of delivering and executing on the dungeon diving fantasy. It's really awesome. I think it's been fun to try the variety and tinker with the different classes and builds, and the whole loop of bringing this D&D fantasy into the Tarkov go in, loot, survive, extract. That just feels really good and is really fun. My biggest cons: super clunky, simplistic combat, and class balance seems way out of whack. Now, the good news is that the game hasn't even launched yet. So where they're at is, at this point, they've done a few rounds of what they're calling alpha playtests. We are currently on number 3. These have lasted anywhere between a few days to a week. I think the first one took place in September, and now we're on number 3 here in December. Speaking of which, this current one was supposed to end on the 23rd, but the developer has extended it to the 26th, which is really cool. No doubt partially due to the game picking up steam big time. With each passing day, the peak concurrent player count has kept rising. As of this recording, it's surpassed 55,000 players. It looks like today it's going to go up above 60, possibly 65,000 players. This game is getting really popular really fast. And remember, this is for an alpha playtest of an indie game that isn't even out yet. Dark and Darker isn't scheduled to release until Q4 2023, so somewhere between 9 and 12 months from now. That is a lot of time to add polish, content, and general improvements, and I really think the game is already in a really good spot. Yeah, I would say if you even slightly like the premise of a D&D Tarkov loot extract game and have any tolerance for janky combat, everything else about this game is great. It's a lot of fun, and I think it has a lot of potential, given that it's not even launching for like another year. So I'm really excited. I've really enjoyed Dark and Darker, and I'm looking forward to see where it goes. So far from what I've played, this really feels like a winning formula. That's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.